Well, here we are. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. In the words of the great Jay-Z, you could have been anywhere in the world today, but you're here with me, and I appreciate that. It's Tuesday. It's before Thanksgiving. Um, there's a lot that we're looking to build up to. A lot of changes in the air. And this is a session that has that in mind, especially when it comes to our lens of creating meaningful learning experiences, regardless of when that takes place, before or after. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today for the Audacity of Light, reevaluating today's classrooms as learning spaces. This has been a really interesting time in regards to the idea of a classroom. There have been a lot of models put in place, whether students are learning remotely, whether they are in person for a concurrent model. I don't like to say hybrid unless students are on an A-B schedule. If it's a situation where students are where a teacher is teaching students online and in person at the same time, I don't see that in the true sense of a hybrid as Emma Pass, the writer of the Hybrid Teacher's Survival Guide, might. So the idea of concurrent, hybrid, and virtual as well as in person. It's really interesting because I think we have a different vision for what the classroom is in all of those conditions. And so this session is the product of a lot of reflections and research into this concept as we move forward. Regardless of what our immediate future is, it's always powerful to have a vision on where you'd like to take the idea of the physical space down the line in the future, because it's always evolving. And regardless of what trends are, there's always a great amount of science and history behind that. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about the classroom from an educator's perspective, and what that really is a workspace, right? And what got me thinking about this was an experience recently that was probably one of the most important and memorable experiences of my life. Back in August, it was the second day of school, and I was very fortunate that my principal allowed me the opportunity to take a day off to head down to Culver City to Sony Picture Studios. I had been undergoing the process of auditioning and testing as a contestant to appear on Jeopardy. And I got the call to appear as a contestant. We taped on August 25th. And it was incredible. It was everything I thought it was going to be. I walked away as a two-time champion. I got Johnny Gilbert to announce me and my cash totals of $52,204. I got to write my name on everything, like the entire experience. And it was especially interesting because, as we know, it was one of Alex Trebek's final tapings. And to have the interactions I did with him is something I'm always going to have with me. But what really stood out to me when I got on set was how well that space was set up for contestants. And I want to share that perspective with you. This is a picture that Jeopardy recently released, kind of a behind the podium look. If you've ever wondered what a contestant sees, this is it. So I want to highlight a few things for you here. First of all, the board is much bigger than you think it's going to be. It's got to be at least 20 or 30 feet tall. Now, with that said, it's not always easy to read the clues. It actually appears here in very kind of, discernible script. I'm really glad I had the laser eye surgery. But they also make it accessible over here. If you notice, there's a secondary monitor here. This is where you will see the clues in a larger print. Also, if there is a visual that goes along with the clue, this is where you would see it. So you have a couple of different ways of interacting with the clues. In addition to that, people always wonder, well, like, how do you see the score? Is it on this monitor over here? And the answer is no. That is exclusively the domain for where you would do any of your stylus work, like writing your name for the front of the podium or your responses for Final Jeopardy. Where you see your scores are up here, directly above the cameras. So it's laid out based on your viewpoint as a contestant. So for example, if you're in the champion podium right here, this is your score. If you are in the far podium on the side, this is yours. If you're in the middle, this is where yours is. So you'll always be able to reference and see where you are in relation to your other contestants without having to lean over the front. I thought there were some really other interesting features of the podium as well, such as these little controls over on the side. These are speakers and microphone pickups. You wear a microphone as a contestant, but they also want to make sure that the sound quality for you, so that you're able to hear everything okay, that Alex Trebek may have said, is clear. So that's there as well. They provide you with a bottle of water. There's a sheet of paper here, a couple of sheets of paper for working out daily double wagers, Final Jeopardy, a backup for your Final Jeopardy response in case the monitor goes down, to calculate that out. You know, you have your signaling device over here, but if you notice, there's a little clip so that you can put it down when you're not using it. Something else that you don't see is they have a hydraulic lift platform that will raise you up so that you are at the same height as your fellow contestants, so that everybody is level. And it's funny because they have to warn you that it's happening, because they'll just start raising it and it'll throw you off. So one more thing that maybe as a contestant you don't notice. When it comes to the signaling devices, if you click in too early, you get locked out for a quarter of a second. And more important than knowing everything is the ability to signal in to be able to give the answer. So they'll wait until the host is done reading the clue for you to signal in. And the way that they'll let you know that it's time is that there are a string of LED lights on either side of the board here. And when you see those flash, it's time for you to clue in. Additionally, you see these little dots here. Those are the timer lights to let you know how much time you have to respond. And there's an additional face light to help with the cameras that are coming directly at you. And if you need to know which camera is live at that point, there'll be a little red light above either one in that direct view. There is a lot in place to let you as a contestant be as successful as you can possibly be, so that everything is set up for you. And I thought that was significant because it made me reflect on some of my other experiences in prior careers before education. And those include professional broadcasting. I'm originally from New York, but I attended college at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, where I worked as the sports director for student radio station WRBB, 104.9 FM. I was the main play-by-play voice for Northeastern men's football, basketball, baseball, and my number one passion, hockey. Our office was Matthews Arena, the oldest indoor ice rink in the world. It was built in 1910, completed 2 years, and opened before Fenway Park. Babe Ruth used to play ice hockey in this building during his off seasons. So my office during this time was right up there. Doesn't seem like the best seat in the house, but it actually ended up being exactly what I needed, because you're able to get a full rink level view of all the action from above. You can see plays developing from afar. In addition, up there as a radio broadcaster, we had phone lines that allowed us to connect to our radio station. We had quick access to stats. We had other platforms built in to allow us to be very efficient in how we called the game. We had an additional scoreboard handy that provided us additional numbers to kind of predict and work by. There was a light that let us know when it was time for immediate timeout. The office was set up for me to be successful. And that's not that unusual in sports broadcast settings. One of the other places I got to experience sports broadcasting 101 was at the press level at Fenway Park. One of my professors, Joe Castiglione, you'll see him right here on the right in this photo from 2018, is the longtime play-by-play voice of the Boston Red Sox. He was there when the ball went between Buckner's legs, and he was there when Veritek caught the ball from Keith Foulke to win the World Series in 2004 and beyond. And what's fascinating, too, is you have a very similar type of setup. However, it's personalized for the needs of each broadcaster here. If you notice, Professor Castiglione, as well as this gentleman over here, that's Sean McDonough, if you're familiar with the broadcasting world, have headset microphones, while in the center, Dave O'Brien prefers to work with the stick mic. He has his headset built in. If you notice, there's a box over here called the cough box. And particularly for Sean and Dave, if they find that they've got a little frog in the throat, they can push onto this right here. Oh, I'll go back there. They can push onto that right there. Let me get the drawing here. And it will mute their microphone temporarily while they clear their throat. In addition, you have some papers up here. I know it seems very low tech, but these are the regular promos that they would have to read every 3 or so innings. So it would be a quick reminder. You also have a separate box to interact with the broadcast booth and the flagship radio station. You also have a corkboard back here, as well as a monitor for them to be able to view the television feed. So they may be able to pick up some things that they are not able to visually from behind home plate. Another great office I got to work from while we're continuing on the thread of hockey was the building I eventually graduated from, which is the TD Bank North Garden, home of the Boston Celtics and Bruins. Now, every year in Boston, they would have an annual hockey tournament between the 4 college teams, Northeastern, Boston University, Boston College, and Harvard. They let us use their broadcast facilities. So this is very similar to what we got to work with, and I think this is really interesting. Very similar to college hockey, the perch very high up, very similar to the Red Sox. You see the television monitor right here so that they can get a closer look. However, the broadcaster here, the play-by-play man, Jack Edwards, loves to be very hands-on with what the viewer sees. So if you'll notice, he's got his own kind of graphics set up here. So you can see exactly what he can reference and what he can control as far as what viewers see. So you have the players for both teams. Tonight, it's the Boston Bruins and the Buffalo Sabres. But you also have a running stat sheet. And then these buttons, I don't know if you can notice them here, will bring up graphics and statistics based on a situation. So let's say that the Bruins score the first goal. Well, he'll tap this button. It's a touch screen, and a graphic shows up on screen telling the viewers what the Bruins' record is during the course of the year when they've scored the first goal. It'll also give face-off stats, power plays, time in the attacking zone. So it's very particular. They can bring up that information to tell the story they want. And I bring this up because I think it's interesting how often we walk into classrooms and they're very uniform. They're designed, with an idea in mind of what the learning environment should be. And a lot of times that's prescribed to teachers through the ages as far as what the traditional vision of what a classroom's supposed to look like is. So I want to take some time. Let's take a step back. If you're designing your ideal teachers' professional learning environments, if you're designing your perfect classroom, your ideal, how would that differ from your current or most recent classroom layout? If you are at the admin level, think back to your time as a teacher. How would your dream, your current ideal, differ than your most recent classroom? What would be there? Go ahead and throw that in the chat, or feel free to come on the mic. Interesting discussion point. Put about 2 minutes in for this conversation. The idea of flexible seating, as well as desks that have wheels so that you can have dynamic seating arrangements is always a popular one. The idea that you can utilize them to create different sized small groups for differentiation, bring them together, have that whole class round table discussion. The idea of flexible seating is always a very popular one. Let's not rule out the fact that, kids are pretty good about moving their own desks around if they absolutely need to as well. The idea of setting up learning centers is always significant as well. It may require some facility to be able to pull off multiple stations at the same time. And, if you've ever tried to run a workshop type environment in a classroom, that might take a few months to establish. Start off with one, and then add a second one. And then by the time you get to January, February, you'll be able to rotate a few. The idea of a 360-degree whiteboard setting. If you ever seen Ed Campos present, he loves that idea. I've been able to run it as well. Just being able to get up and work on a whiteboard space no matter where you are in your classroom is great. The idea of multiple devices for instruction. We're going to get into that a little bit, Debbie. Thank you very much for throwing that around. Meditation areas. The idea of what you prioritize, you have space for and hardware for. I think that's really interesting. And the reason I bring this up is because, there was a movement earlier in the school year, all the way back. If you remember the good old days of Bitmoji classrooms when those were getting started. And there was a really interesting trend where teachers created these Google Slides that would look like this really warm and welcoming environment. But if you noticed, a lot of them looked exactly like the classrooms that the teachers had just left and had to kind of be exiled from with distancing and shutdowns. And I thought that was interesting because we have this opportunity to really think about what we'd want in our classrooms if there were no restrictions and no limits. And it's like that old, bit of like from The Office, if you remember, there was a conversation that Jim and Dwight had about Dwight's dream job. And it was basically like to be like an assistant manager. And Dwight goes, "Do you want to know what my salary is? It would be?" And Jim goes, "No, what is it?" He goes, $85,000. And I always thought that was so funny because when you had the opportunity to go limitless with your imagination, the result was just something very much not too distant from the current reality. So I played around with this idea and I explored how others were looking at this. And I thought about what I would really love to see in an ideal classroom, and I digitized that. I thought about the idea of having a monitor just for a timer, but you can also add additional reference material to as like a rotating kiosk that you can reference to. Being able to bring up resources really quickly without having to go through these things. The idea of having a Banksy, even like something to express yourself that might be with outside the realm of possibility. Why not have a Banksy in your classroom? And I just thought it was really interesting that now we have this opportunity to, grow and play around with an ideal and make that possible. I've always loved animation for that reason, is that they're not limited by a physical prop or building upon something that is outside the realm of possibility. In animation, you could have just about anything happen. And something funny happened when this idea got out there. Instead of a true representation of the current classroom, of, kind of using a Bitmoji classroom as like your dream board of what you would like it to be, other teachers kind of went beyond and put their twists on it. A great teacher to follow out in Virginia, Esther Park. She found a way to make sure that she used Unscreen Me to create a GIF of herself actually welcoming students into her classroom. So yes, there are pocket charts and there are digital resources, but she put herself there. So it's more welcoming and more authentic and genuine. I love this idea because now you could truly put yourself anywhere you'd want to go. In addition to that, I saw some teachers throw together some mock-up ideas as far as a space that is familiar to students. Who says that a Bitmoji classroom or a virtual classroom splash page has to be a classroom? This is a mock-up I put together. If you're a student, you know exactly where to go with this because this is a very familiar interface. This is the Nintendo Switch. And how great would it be instead of games to have those resources that you could click to and link to right away? And it only needs to be very, minimalistic, or 4 or 5 things, and you know exactly where to go with this. The idea that a classroom doesn't have to be a classroom anymore is really exciting. I know that that's not always a possibility. However, what we're doing right now is we're starting to kind of negotiate and navigate how to bring some of these ideas back into play as far as physical considerations. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. At the end of this conclusion, at the conclusion of this presentation, you're going to get this slide deck. And I want to show you something that I've built in for you. Now, this might be out of the realm of your control, depending on the decisions that are being made. However, I wanted to kind of play around with what these classrooms might look like in reality. And I built this back in June as an interactive tool. And this is all within the context of Google Slides. So when you get this slide deck, you're going to be able to have an interactive classroom design layout planner. And there's a couple that are out there that you can play around with. This is one that I just wanted to make sure was quick and easy for you to be able to click and drag and move around. There's a couple of links for additional classroom layout planners in the slide deck. One is from forteachers.org, another is from Ginsey. But the idea here is that every square represents a seat, and every circle represents a 6-foot radius. And you can click and drag these around anywhere here in this classroom layout. And again, you can be very precise on the dimensions of your classroom. In this setting, every box with an X represents 1 square foot. So your classrooms might be bigger, smaller, wider, narrower. You can also drag in different elements of your classroom, such as a door, your teacher desk, bookshelves, kidney tables, however, and, duplicate those, play around with those, and you very quickly start to realize what your maximums truly are. And by the way, when we think about, and this is the idea as far as kind of classroom layout as a key component of redesigning learning spaces, I wanted to bring this up, and I know that we're kind of pressed with generally what we consider time here. This would generally be a which one, a what do you notice, what do you wonder? But I bring up the idea of interior design. And if we take a look at every one of these spaces, not necessarily just interior, but when architects and designers plan things out, the one thing that all of these rooms, whether it's a living room, a teppanyaki table at a Japanese hibachi grill, a family room, or, benches out on the shore, is that the seating is always directed towards the focus of the space. In a living room, the couches are all pointing towards the focal area, the television set. When you go to get teppanyaki, they're all pointed towards the grill. When you're in a family room, the focus is the family, so the seating arrangements are such that the chairs or the couches are pointed towards the other chairs and couches. And if you're going to go sit on a bench by the ocean, you don't want your back to the water. And I think about that because a lot of times we think about our classrooms and all of the chairs and all the desks are generally facing the front of the room if it's not set up where you have collaborative seating where there's tables, right? And I know that that's going to be very difficult coming back in the immediate future. So I thought about this because if you think of a traditional classroom that's laid out with 4 walls, we only have our students facing one wall. And I've always considered that to be very limiting as far as what students have access to. Because if you think about that, that means that you have to have a back wall. And when you do so, you prioritize, and it's a shame, what is important and what isn't, right? Think about, we always want student work to be on display, but where does it get displayed? It gets displayed in the place where people look at it the least, and that is, on the back. So when I was teaching at Voorhees Elementary here in Bakersfield, California, 6th grade, self-contained, I sought to maximize the amount of front of the room space. And the great thing is that I only had to do that by rotating the dimensions of the class by about 45 degrees. So in my classroom, I had a dry erase board on one wall to the side and a smart board towards what would be considered the front. All I did was change the orientation by 45 degrees. I put my podium. I didn't have a teacher's desk. I wanted to get rid of that to maximize the amount of space I had. I put my podium in the corner so that in front of the students, and this is what it would look like if I had to arrange this currently in regards to CDC guidelines of 6 feet. All of the desks are pointing towards the podium so that the smartboard and the dry erase board are right at the forefront. Now I've doubled the amount of visible space in front of the classroom for my students. Now what I put towards the back was the windows in my classroom so that there was better lighting. And I want to get into that because that's a really important element. If I was to be able to lay this out currently, it's important to keep in mind that, 6 foot distance doesn't mean that it has to be 6 foot of open space all the way around. There is space in the back. So I would be able to fit about 15 students in this setting and keep a clear path from doorways for circulation. That's going to be something really important to keep in mind as far as maximizing space upon returns is what's essential. Is a teacher desk essential? How are you going to, in a concurrence setting, ensure that you can interact with a smart board efficiently for your students in person as well as remotely? It's important to consider as well that maybe students that are learning remotely want that classroom environment. And if that's the case, Do you have your podium set up to have the webcam facing a smartboard, or do you have it set up where it's a second screen where it's interactive with students so that they could utilize that and you're comfortable with interacting with it? A lot to keep in mind. Again, you'll get to play around with this a little bit down the line. There are a couple more considerations as well, but what I want to do is talk a little bit about what environment we hope to avoid. This was a pet peeve of mine when I was on campus, and the reason that this was such a flashpoint for me was because a lot of times our classrooms are dependent on front of the room projector-based displays, and whether it's an overhead display or an Epson, it was usually attached to a smartboard. We ran into the same issues. After about 2 or 3 years of these being installed, the bulbs start to burn out and grow dim. And whether it was a matter of funding or perception or red tape, they would never get replaced. Teachers would put in requests or the budget would dry up. And all of a sudden, in order to salvage the displays at the front of the room, we would see these drastic measures take place where windows would get papered over, lights would get brought down to about 20% or all the way. And it wouldn't just be for this one class. It would end up being the entire day. And especially for students who don't have ideal conditions at home, the lighting's not great there either. And so it created this bleak culture where students are in the dark all day. And, that was my vision, was to free our dependents from front of the room displays. And so in 2019, I was invited to be a part of Google for Education's Innovator Program. That required a look at a big picture challenge in education. And if it is explored and accepted, they would invite you to one of their offices somewhere in the world to work with other educators, as well as their designers and engineers and thinkers, to come up with a solution. And so I was accepted to attend the cohort in London in 2019. And the challenge I put forward was this one. How might we encourage learning environments that are less dependent on front displays and more amenable to healthier lighting? And what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to take a couple of minutes to kind of pose this question to you. If this was a challenge, if this was a design thinking question that you had the opportunity to play around with, how would you attack that? And I want to give you some time to play around with that. I'm going to step back here and just let the chat run through that, Stephanie. If you could just kind of walk people through and highlight some of the things that get brought up. And I'll be back in just a moment.
Okay.
Sorry to scare you, everybody. But it was interesting to hear some of those conversations. One of the things I heard right there at the tail end was taking it outside. And that was, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that was one of the things that kind of shifted as far as my questioning, because there was a really important moment in the exploration of my challenge. In fact, it was my coach at the time, a gentleman by the name of Ben Rouse. And he says, okay, so you want to improve lighting conditions on your campus. What's the best lighting conditions that you currently have for your students? And I don't know, I'm a smart aleck guy from New York, so I just chuckled at him. I don't know, the sun. And I stopped and I realized that's exactly what it was. And so if our goal is to become less dependent on front displays for healthier lighting, the healthiest lighting we could give them is the sun. So my challenge shifted, and it went from how might we improve, how might we become less dependent on front room displays, to how might we shift learning environments towards better lit existing spaces on campus. And the general hesitation with going outside is that it's twofold, really. One, it's not easy outdoor lessons, right? An outdoor lesson is, seemingly impossible to pull off these days because all of our resources are digital. And the challenge with digital resources is that it's very difficult to bring those outside, because it's tough to see because of the glare of the sun. And even on like cooler days, devices that are in direct sunlight heat up very, very quickly. And so, if you've ever tried to do work on a Chromebook outside, it's not always ideal, especially when you're presenting material. So, in an interesting way, we've kind of handcuffed ourselves from doing too much outdoor lessons because one, the devices don't always work well outside, and two, it's difficult to shift a lesson from inside to outside. And so that was my challenge. And I thought about that. I'm not a very technical guy. I could do a spreadsheet, I could build a website. But as far as like a device that would make things brighter outside, I struggled with that until I realized I didn't have to make things brighter. I just had to shield devices from the sun. This is the result of about a year's worth of work and design. This is called the Outsider. This was what I got to prototype and work with thanks to Google's designers. It is a PVC pipe built device. It has a capacity of about 200 pounds, built with solar fabric that allows for devices inside to maintain a cooler pressure, cooler temperature, and be more visible with what is on screen. The great thing about this is it's also built on pneumatic tires about 8 inches with locking casters in the front. So it's about as easy to roll around just by pulling it down and taking it with you. No matter where you are on campus, it is transportable any type of surface. So grass, dirt, linoleum, cement, wherever you want to take it, it's there for you. So it allows you to transport your learning very quickly. It's also built within the dimensions of a classroom door, so that you could just as quickly put your cart, put your.
You're back in. You're just on mute. There you go.
Gotcha, everybody. You know, one of the things that is also a benefit of this here, I got you, is it instead of building hardware in that would allow for signals to stay steady, is there are pockets built in so that you can bring in any devices that you would attach wirelessly that would be beneficial. Things like Bluetooth speakers or Wi-Fi hotspots. Again, you can make this customizable so you don't have to sacrifice technology when you go outside. So let me share very quickly here some of the benefits that go alongside of remote learning. Let's see, do I have the ability to share screen? Here we go. Let me pull this up very quickly. So some of the benefits that we've seen, and this is from a quick kind of white paper from University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. There is a tremendous amount of research that shows when students are beginning a lesson inside and then continue the lesson outside or work independently or explore more or do a reading and then conclude the lesson inside, that student achievement and performance and retention is increased. Beyond that, there is a deeper connection between multiple environments and students' social emotional well-being, mental and social health. Anytime you're in an extended period of a darkened, poorly lit environment, it hits hard, especially with students struggling with clinical depression and anxiety. And that comes from personal experience. So any opportunity to change the scene is beneficial for all parties involved. Hey, we're not just talking about students, we're also talking about staff who could use a change of scenery, because a lot of times they get stuck in this bubble and it's very difficult for them to connect with what else is happening. In addition to that, it supports child development. One of the reasons that middle schoolers in particular love going outside, and this comes from direct quotes when I've tested this on my campus, is that it reminds them of kindergarten. And in their words, when I loved coming to school. Sitting on the carpet, crisscross applesauce, teacher with a story. How great is it when kids get to learn under the shade of the learning tree? In addition to that, kids get excited about going, teachers get excited about going outside. So it allows you to inject enthusiasm for a lesson quickly. It also allows students and the community to take a sense of civic pride in what's happening in the school, because they have a connection. They can actually see what's happening. A lot of times the classroom wall is a brick barrier that provides kind of a no look sense and allows people outside to speculate what's going on. Now the speculation's gone. So there's a tremendous amount of family and community engagements because now parents can see themselves becoming more involved in learning. So with that said, we're at 10:30. I want to thank you so much for joining me for this session. This is a short link to the session itself, but please feel free to reach out and connect with me on Twitter at Devin Rossiter and LinkedIn. Visit my website, devinrossiter.com. But also, if you're interested in The Outsider, check out our website, outsidereducation.com. We will be making our Amazon debut shortly for distribution. We're really excited for that. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to come and present for Santa Cruz today. So thank you so much.